The morning sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Drive as Colonel Diana Thompson turned her silver Honda Civic onto the quiet street. She had just spent the weekend with her mother, helping her organize old photo albums and catching up on family news. At 52, Diana had served her country for over 25 years, rising through the ranks to become one of the few black women to hold the rank of colonel in the U.S. Army. But today, she was just a daughter who had helped her aging mother sort through decades of memories. Diana hummed softly to the jazz music playing from her radio. The neighborhood was peaceful, with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses. She drove carefully, keeping exactly at the speed limit of 25 miles per hour. This wasn't her neighborhood, but she knew it well from visiting her mother who had lived here for the past 15 years. 3 blocks behind her, Officer Blake Harrison sat in his patrol car, finishing his morning coffee. Harrison had been with the Oakwood Police Department for 12 years, and he considered this upscale neighborhood his territory. He knew most of the residents by sight, and he prided himself on keeping the area safe and secure. When he spotted the Honda Civic with an unfamiliar driver, his interest was immediately sparked. Harrison pulled out from his parking spot and began following the vehicle. The car wasn't speeding, wasn't weaving, wasn't doing anything wrong. But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but his instincts told him to investigate further. Diana noticed the police car in her rearview mirror but thought nothing of it. She had nothing to hide and was doing nothing wrong. She continued driving, thinking about the meeting she had scheduled for Monday morning. As a logistics coordinator, she was responsible for planning supply routes for overseas operations. It was demanding work, but she loved the challenge and the opportunity to serve her fellow soldiers. Harrison followed for another 2 blocks, watching the driver's every move. The person behind the wheel seemed calm and confident, but that only made him more suspicious. In his experience, people who belonged in neighborhoods like this didn't drive so carefully. They drove with the casual confidence of someone who owned the place. This driver seemed different, almost too respectful of the traffic rules. At the next intersection, Diana came to a complete stop at the stop sign, looked both ways, and proceeded slowly. Harrison's suspicion grew. Who stops that completely at a stop sign unless they're trying to avoid attention? He decided it was time to make contact. Diana's heart sank when she saw the red and blue lights flash in her mirror. She had been pulled over only a handful of times in her life, always for minor infractions like a burnt-out taillight or slightly exceeding the speed limit. Each time had been routine and professional. She pulled over to the side of the road, turned off her engine, and placed her hands clearly on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Harrison approached the vehicle with his hand resting on his service weapon. This was unusual for a routine traffic stop, but something about this situation made him feel on edge. He walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with his knuckle. Diana rolled down her window completely and looked up at the officer with a polite smile. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you today?" Harrison studied her face for a moment. She appeared to be in her early 50s, well-dressed in a simple blue blouse and dark slacks. Her hair was neatly styled and she wore minimal jewelry. Everything about her appearance suggested she was a respectable professional woman, but Harrison had learned not to trust appearances. "License and registration," Harrison said curtly, without offering any explanation for the stop. "Of course," Diana replied calmly. She reached slowly toward her purse, narrating her movements to avoid any misunderstandings. "I'm reaching for my purse now to get my license." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Harrison snapped, his tone sharper than necessary. Diana paused, surprised by his aggressive tone. "I'm just getting my license, officer. My purse is right here on the passenger seat." "I said keep your hands visible," Harrison repeated, his voice rising slightly. Diana carefully moved her hands back to the steering wheel. "Officer, I need to reach into my purse to get my license and registration. Would you prefer that I step out of the vehicle so you can see what I'm doing?" Harrison's eyes narrowed. In his mind, her politeness and cooperation seemed almost rehearsed, as if she had been through this before. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, ignoring her question about the documents. "I was visiting my mother," Diana answered, honestly. She lives on Maple Street, just a few blocks from here. Your mother, Harrison repeated skeptically. What's the address? Diana provided her mother's address without hesitation. Harrison made a note but didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He walked around to the front of the vehicle and wrote down the license plate number, taking his time and making a show of his thoroughness. Diana waited patiently, her hands still on the steering wheel. She had dealt with difficult situations before in her military career, and she knew that staying calm and respectful was always the best approach. She wondered what had prompted the stop, since she was certain she hadn't violated any traffic laws. Harrison returned to the driver's side. Window. This your car? He asked. Yes, sir, it is, Diana replied. You got proof of that? Diana was confused by the question. My registration should show that, officer. It's in my glove compartment. May I retrieve it? Instead of answering, Harrison asked another question. What do you do for work? I work for the government, Diana said simply. She had learned over the years that mentioning her military rank sometimes made people uncomfortable in civilian settings, so she often kept her responses general. Government work, Harrison said with a slight smirk. What kind of government work pays for a car like this? Diana was taken aback by the question. Her Honda Civic was 7 years old and hardly luxurious. Officer, I'm not sure I understand the relevance of my employment to this traffic stop. Could you please tell me why you pulled me over? Harrison's demeanor grew more hostile. I'll ask the questions here. Step out of the vehicle. May I ask why? Diana inquired politely. Because I'm telling you to, Harrison responded, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Step out of the car, now. Diana complied immediately, recognizing the escalation in the officer's tone. She opened her door slowly and stepped out, keeping her hands visible at all times. She was tall and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to command, but she was careful not to make any sudden movements. Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle, Harrison ordered. Diana's confusion deepened, but she followed the instruction. This was far beyond anything she had experienced in previous traffic stops. Officer, I'd really like to understand what I've done wrong, she said over her shoulder. Just stay quiet and keep your hands where I can see them, Harrison replied as he began to search her vehicle. As Harrison rifled through her car, Diana stood quietly, her mind racing. She thought about her spotless driving record, her decades of military service, and her contributions to her community. She couldn't understand what had triggered this level of suspicion and hostility from the officer. The morning sun grew warmer as the encounter stretched on, and Diana could see curious neighbors beginning to peer out their windows. She felt a mixture of embarrassment and frustration, but she remained calm and cooperative, hoping the situation would resolve itself quickly and peacefully. Harrison finished searching through Diana's glove compartment and emerged from the passenger side. With her registration and insurance papers, he examined them carefully, looking for any inconsistency or reason to escalate the situation further. The documents were in perfect order, clearly showing that Diana Thompson was the registered owner of the vehicle. These papers look suspicious, Harrison announced, though they were clearly legitimate. How long have you owned this car? Diana turned her head slightly while keeping her hands on the roof. About 7 years, officer. I bought it new from the Honda dealership downtown. 7 years, Harrison repeated, as if the timeline itself was questionable. And you can afford the payments on a government salary? The question struck Diana as both inappropriate and concerning. Officer, my financial situation isn't really relevant to a traffic stop. Could you please explain what traffic violation I've committed? Harrison's jaw tightened at her response. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone he viewed as suspicious. I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle, he declared suddenly. Diana's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible, officer. I don't use drugs of any kind. I'm subject to regular drug testing through my job. Sure you are, Harrison said sarcastically. Everyone says that. Diana felt a chill run down her spine. She realized this wasn't going to be a simple traffic stop that would end with a warning, or even a ticket. The officer seemed determined to find fault with her regardless of the facts. "Officer, I give you permission to search my entire vehicle," Diana said clearly. "You won't find any drugs because there aren't any." Harrison had already begun a more thorough search, pulling out floor mats and checking under seats. He opened her gym bag and rifled through her workout clothes. He examined her mother's leftover apple pie that sat in a container on the back seat, even opening it to look inside. As he searched, more neighbors emerged from their homes. Mrs. Chen from across the street stood on her porch, clearly concerned by what she was witnessing. An elderly man walking his dog stopped on the sidewalk, pretending to let his pet sniff around while obviously watching the scene unfold. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Mrs. Chen called out from her porch. Harrison spun around sharply. "This is police. Business. Please go back inside your house." "I live here," Mrs. Chen replied firmly. "I have every right to stand on my own porch." Diana felt grateful for the woman's presence but worried about how Harrison might react to additional attention. "I'm fine, thank you," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. Harrison pulled out his radio. "This is Unit 12. I need backup at 1247 Oakwood Drive. I've got a suspicious vehicle stop, possible drug involvement." Diana's heart sank further. She knew that calling for backup would only escalate the situation and create more of a scene. "Officer Harrison," she said, reading his name tag. "I really think there's been a misunderstanding here." "How do you know my name?" Harrison demanded, spinning around to face her. "It's on your name tag," Diana replied simply. Harrison looked down at his uniform, suddenly self-conscious that he hadn't noticed her reading it. This only added to his irritation. A young woman jogging with her phone in hand slowed her pace as she approached the scene. She had obviously been listening to music through her earbuds, but she pulled them out when she saw Diana standing against the car with her hands on the roof. "Oh my goodness," the jogger said, stopping completely. "Is everything all right here?" "Keep moving," Harrison ordered. "This doesn't concern you." But the jogger didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began recording. "I'm just making sure everyone's safe," she said. Harrison noticed the phone immediately. "Put that away. You can't record an active police investigation." "Actually, I can," the jogger replied politely but firmly. "It's perfectly legal to record police activity in public." Diana closed her eyes briefly, knowing that being recorded would make this experience even more embarrassing. But she also understood that the video might protect her if the situation continued to escalate. Harrison's backup arrived in the form of Officer Lopez, a younger man who had been on the force for only 3 years. Lopez parked his patrol car behind Harrison's vehicle and approached the scene with curiosity rather than aggression. "What do we have here, Blake?" Lopez asked, surveying the situation. "Suspicious vehicle in the neighborhood," Harrison replied. "Driver's being evasive about her business here. I detected the odor of marijuana." Lopez looked at Diana, who remained calm and cooperative despite the obviously stressful situation. Something about her demeanor struck him as unusual for someone who was supposedly involved in criminal activity. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Lopez," he said in a much more professional tone than Harrison had used. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Diana turned her head to look at Lopez while keeping her hands on the car. "I was driving home from visiting my mother when Officer Harrison pulled me over. I haven't been told what traffic violation I committed, and I can assure you there are no drugs in my vehicle." Lopez nodded thoughtfully. "Have you been drinking today, ma'am?" "No, sir. I don't drink alcohol." "Any prescription medications?" "Just vitamins," Diana replied. Lopez could immediately tell the difference between Diana's respectful, clear responses and the evasive behavior Harrison had described. Her speech was crisp and professional. Her posture was confident despite the circumstances, and everything about her suggested she was telling the truth. "Blake, did you find anything in the vehicle?" Lopez asked. Harrison's face reddened slightly. "Still searching," he muttered, though he had already gone through the entire car twice. By now, several more neighbors had gathered. The jogger continued recording, and Mrs. Chen had been joined on her porch by her husband. A man in his 70s who lived next door came out to water his plants, clearly using the activity as an excuse to observe what was happening. This is getting out of hand, Diana thought to herself. She had never experienced anything like this in her entire life. Even during her deployments in challenging regions overseas, she had been treated with more respect and dignity than she was receiving from this police officer in her own country. "Officer Lopez," Diana said carefully, "I'd like to file a complaint about how this stop has been conducted." Harrison spun around angrily. "You want to file a complaint? How about I arrest you for obstruction of justice?" "For what?" Lopez intervened, clearly confused. "Sir, what exactly is she obstructing?" Harrison realized he had painted himself into a corner. He had no evidence of any wrongdoing, no justification for the extended detention, and no legitimate reason for the aggressive search of the vehicle. "She's being uncooperative," Harrison said weakly. Lopez looked at Diana again. She had followed every instruction, answered every question politely, and even given permission for the vehicle search. If anything, she had been remarkably cooperative, given the circumstances. The situation was becoming increasingly tense with more witnesses gathering, and Harrison growing more frustrated by his inability to find anything incriminating. Diana remained calm, but inside she was thinking about all the times she had heard about incidents like this happening to other people. She never imagined she would find herself in such a position, standing on a public street being treated like a criminal for no apparent reason. The morning sun continued to climb higher, and what had started as a simple drive home from her mother's house had turned into a public spectacle that would soon change everything. Officer Lopez watched the scene with growing concern. He had worked with Harrison before and knew the older officer could be difficult, but this situation seemed to be spiraling out of control for no clear reason. The woman standing against the car appeared calm and professional, nothing like the suspicious character Harrison had described over the radio. "Ma'am, what do you do for work?" Lopez asked Diana, hoping to understand the situation better. Diana hesitated for a moment. She had learned over the years that revealing her military rank sometimes created unexpected reactions. Some people became overly respectful, while others seemed to resent her position. But given the circumstances, she felt it was time to be completely honest. "I serve in the United States Army," Diana replied clearly. Lopez's eyebrows raised slightly. "What's your rank?" "Colonel," Diana said simply. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lopez took a step back, his entire demeanor changing instantly. He looked at Diana with new eyes, suddenly seeing the military bearing that had been obvious all along. Her straight posture, her calm under pressure, her respectful but firm responses. It all made perfect sense now. Harrison, however, let out a harsh laugh. "Colonel? Really? That's what we're going with now?" "Blake," Lopez said quietly, "I think we need to take this seriously." "Come on, Rodriguez," Harrison scoffed, using Lopez's first name dismissively. "Look at her. You really think she's a colonel in the Army?" Lopez felt his stomach drop. He had served 2 years in the Marines before joining the police force, and he understood military protocol and respect. If this woman was telling the truth, Harrison had just committed a career-ending mistake. "Ma'am, do you have any identification that can verify your rank?" Lopez asked respectfully. "Yes, I do," Diana replied. "My military ID is in my wallet, which is in my purse in the front seat." "Blake, let her get her ID," Lopez said firmly. Harrison shook his head stubbornly. IDs can be faked. Anyone can claim to be anything these days. But Lopez was no longer taking orders from Harrison. "Ma'am, please retrieve your identification slowly. I'll escort you to your vehicle." Diana nodded gratefully and walked to the passenger side of her car with Lopez beside her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a slim wallet, then carefully extracted her military identification card. She handed it to Lopez, who examined it closely. The ID was clearly authentic, with proper government security features and Diana's official photograph in her dress uniform. Lopez read the information twice to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Colonel Diana Thompson, United States Army, with over 25 years of active service. "Oh my God," Lopez whispered, his face going pale. The jogger with the camera had moved closer and caught Lopez's reaction on video. She zoomed in on his shocked expression, understanding that something significant was happening. "What's it say?" Harrison demanded, striding over to look at the ID himself. Lopez handed him the card with trembling hands. Harrison glanced at it dismissively, then did a double take. His eyes widened as he read the information, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "This could be fake," Harrison insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You can buy fake IDs online these days. Military IDs, driver's licenses, anything." Diana looked at Harrison with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. "Officer, why would I carry a fake military ID? What would be the purpose?" "To get out of trouble when you get caught doing something illegal," Harrison replied, but his argument was becoming weaker by the minute. Lopez was already on his radio, calling his supervisor. "Sergeant Williams, this is Lopez. I need you to respond to 1247 Oakwood Drive immediately. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Mrs. Chen had been watching from her porch and decided to approach. "Excuse me, officers," she called out as she walked across the street. "Is that Diana Thompson?" All eyes turned to the elderly Asian woman as she got closer to the group. "I thought that was you," Mrs. Chen said to Diana with a warm smile. "You probably don't remember me, but I attended the community meeting where you spoke about your work overseas. My grandson is thinking about joining the military, and your presentation inspired him." Harrison felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't part of his plan. He had expected to find drugs, make an arrest, and be done with it. Now he had witnesses, recording devices, and a woman who was apparently well known in the community. "Mrs. Chen, it's good to see you again," Diana replied politely, though she was still standing against her car with her hands visible. "What's happening here?" Mrs. Chen asked, looking between the officers and Diana. "Why is Colonel Thompson being treated this way?" Lopez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding. We're working to resolve it right now." "A misunderstanding?" Mrs. Chen's voice rose slightly. "This woman has served our country for decades. She's given presentations at our community center about her humanitarian work. What kind of misunderstanding requires treating her like a criminal?" Harrison realized that the situation was rapidly getting out of control. More neighbors were gathering. The woman was still recording, and now there was someone who could personally vouch for Diana's identity and character. A police supervisor's car pulled up with its lights flashing. Sergeant Williams stepped out, a stocky man in his late 40s with graying hair and 20 years of experience. He surveyed the scene quickly, taking in the crowd of onlookers, the woman with the camera, and the obvious tension between his officers. "What's the situation here?" Williams asked as he approached. Lopez stepped forward quickly. "Sergeant, Officer Harrison initiated a traffic stop on this woman for suspicious behavior. She's identified herself as Colonel Diana Thompson, U.S. Army. I verified her military ID." Williams looked at Diana, who was still standing against her vehicle. Something about her bearing immediately struck him as military. He had served in the Army himself before joining the police force, and he recognized the unmistakable posture and presence of a career officer. "Colonel Thompson," Williams said respectfully, "I apologize for this situation. Would you mind if I looked at your identification?" "Of course, Sergeant," Diana replied, handing over her military ID once again. Williams examined the card carefully, noting every security feature in detail. Unlike Harrison, he had the experience to recognize authentic military documentation. After a thorough inspection, he handed the ID back to Diana. "Colonel, I want to personally apologize for how this stop has been conducted," Williams said formally. "There appears to have been a significant misunderstanding." Harrison stepped forward aggressively. "Sergeant, I don't care who she claims to be. I detected the odor of marijuana coming from that vehicle." Williams turned to look at Harrison with a stern expression. "Officer Harrison, step away from the scene immediately. I want to speak with you privately." "But Sergeant, that's an order, Harrison. Move away from the vehicle now." As Harrison reluctantly moved toward the patrol cars, Williams turned back to Diana. Colonel, you're free to go. Again, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Diana nodded but remained where she was. Sergeant Williams, I want to file a formal complaint about Officer Harrison's conduct during this stop. Ma'am, I completely understand, and you have every right to do so. I'll make sure you have all the necessary paperwork and contact information. The jogger with the camera approached cautiously. Excuse me, Colonel Thompson. I recorded this entire incident. Would you like me to send you a copy of the video? Diana considered the offer for a moment. Yes, please. I think that would be very helpful. As word spread through the growing crowd of neighbors about Diana's true identity, Harrison stood alone by his patrol car, realizing that his career was probably over. The woman he had targeted for driving while black in a nice neighborhood was not only innocent but was also one of the highest-ranking military officers in the area. The morning sun was now high overhead, and what had started as a routine drive home had become something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. The jogger, who had introduced herself as Ashley, immediately pulled out her phone and began uploading the video to social media. "This is unbelievable," she muttered as she typed a caption. Army colonel gets racially profiled during traffic stop in Oakwood neighborhood. Officer refuses to believe her rank even after seeing military ID. Within minutes of Ashley posting the video, her phone began buzzing with notifications. Comments started pouring in, and the share count began climbing rapidly. The footage clearly showed Harrison's aggressive behavior, his dismissive attitude when presented with Diana's military ID, and his stubborn refusal to acknowledge his mistake, even when confronted by his supervisor. Mrs. Chen had returned to her house and was already on the phone with her daughter, who worked as a journalist for the local television station. "Rebecca, you need to see this," Mrs. Chen said urgently. "There's been an incident in our neighborhood that you should know about." Meanwhile, Diana sat in her car filling out a formal complaint with Sergeant Williams. Her hands were steady as she wrote, but inside she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. In all her years of military service, including deployments in hostile territories, she had never felt as humiliated as she did during those 30 minutes on Oakwood Drive. "Colonel, I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated," Williams assured her. "Officer Harrison's conduct was completely unacceptable and there will be consequences." Diana looked up from the paperwork. "Sergeant, this isn't just about me. How many other people has Officer Harrison treated this way? How many others didn't have the privilege of rank or community connections to protect them?" Williams nodded, gravely. "You're absolutely right, ma'am. This investigation will include a review of Officer Harrison's previous stops and interactions." As Diana finished the complaint, her phone began ringing. The caller ID showed her assistant's name from the military base where she worked. "Colonel Thompson, I'm getting calls from reporters asking about an incident this morning," her assistant said. "They're saying there's a video online. Are you okay?" Diana sighed. "I'm fine, Lieutenant. There was an incident with local police, but I'm handling it through proper channels." "Ma'am, the video has been shared thousands of times already. It's trending on social media platforms. The base commander wants to speak with you as soon as possible." Diana felt her heart sink. She had hoped to handle this matter quietly, but it seemed the situation was already beyond her control. Across town, Harrison sat in the police station's break room, staring at his phone in disbelief. His fellow officers were showing him the video, and the comment section was brutal. People were identifying him by name, calling for his termination, and sharing their own stories of similar encounters. "Blake, you really messed up this time," said Officer Davis, who had worked with Harrison for several years. "Do you have any idea who Diana Thompson is? She's been featured in the newspaper multiple times for her community service work. She speaks at schools and veterans events." Harrison's face was pale. "How was I supposed to know that? Maybe if you treated people with basic respect instead of assuming the worst about everyone," Davis replied sharply. The police chief, Robert Martinez, had been in meetings all morning when his secretary rushed into the conference room. "Chief Martinez, we have an emergency situation. There's a video going viral that shows one of our officers in a very bad light." Martinez excused himself from the meeting and hurried to his office, where his staff showed him Ashley's video on a large computer screen. He watched in horror as the incident unfolded, seeing Harrison's aggressive behavior and unprofessional conduct. "How many views does this have?" Martinez asked. "Over 50,000 in the last 2 hours, and it's accelerating," his communications director replied. "Local news stations are already calling for statements." Martinez rubbed his temples. "Get me everything we have on Officer Harrison's service record, and I want a full timeline of this morning's events on my desk within the hour." At the local television station, Rebecca Chen was reviewing the video her mother had sent her. As an investigative reporter, she knew a significant story when she saw one. She immediately began researching Diana Thompson's background and discovered an impressive record of military service and community involvement. "We need to get this on the evening news," Rebecca told her producer. "But I want to approach it responsibly. This isn't just about one bad traffic stop. This is about systemic issues in policing." Back in the Oakwood neighborhood, Diana had finally been allowed to leave the scene. She drove the remaining few blocks to her mother's house, needing time to process what had happened. Her mother, Ruth, was waiting on the front porch with a worried expression. "Diana, Mrs. Chen called me. She said there was trouble with the police. Are you hurt?" Diana embraced her mother, feeling the weight of the morning's events. "I'm okay, Mom." But it was really difficult. As they sat in Ruth's living room, Diana's phone continued to ring constantly. Reporters, military colleagues, and community members were all trying to reach her. She finally turned off the phone, needing some peace to think clearly. "You know, your father dealt with things like this when he was young," Ruth said quietly. "He always said the hardest part wasn't the incident itself, but deciding how to respond to it." Diana's father had been a civil rights activist. In the 1960s, before becoming a teacher, he had taught her that dignity and principle were more important than popularity or convenience. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread across social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, and it began appearing on national websites. The hashtag Justice for Colonel Thompson started trending, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences with police misconduct. Harrison's phone was ringing constantly as well, but the calls were very different from Diana's. Friends and family members were calling to express their shock and disappointment. His own mother called, crying, asking him to explain what she had seen on television. "I was just doing my job," Harrison tried to explain, but even he was beginning to realize how hollow those words sounded. The police union representative arrived at the station to meet with Harrison. "Blake, this is bad," the representative said bluntly. "The video makes it impossible to defend your actions. You need to prepare for the possibility of termination." By evening, the story had reached national news networks. Military advocacy groups released statements condemning the treatment of Colonel Thompson. Veterans organizations expressed outrage that a decorated officer had been subjected to such treatment while visiting her elderly mother. The mayor's office was flooded with calls demanding action. City council members who had never heard of Harrison before were now calling for investigations into the entire police department's practices. Diana finally turned her phone back on and was overwhelmed by the number of messages. Reporters wanted interviews, military officials wanted briefings, and community leaders wanted meetings, but the message that touched her most came from a young soldier at her base. "Colonel Thompson, I saw what happened to you today. Thank you for handling it with such dignity. You showed me what real strength looks like." As Diana read through dozens of similar messages from service members, she realized that her response to this incident would be watched by many people, especially young people who looked up to her as a role model. The incident that had started as a simple traffic stop was now a national conversation about race, policing, and justice, and Diana found herself at the center of it all, facing a choice about how to use her voice and her platform to make a difference. 3 days after the incident, Diana sat in her office at the military base, preparing for what would be the most important press conference of her life. The video had now been viewed over 2 million times, and the story had sparked conversations about racial profiling across the country. News crews from major networks had set up outside the base, waiting for her statement. Her commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes, knocked on the door. "Diana, are you ready for this? You know you don't have to do the press conference if you're not comfortable." Diana looked up from her notes. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, General. If I don't speak up, who will? How many people go through this same experience but don't have the platform I have? The media attention has been intense, General Hayes acknowledged. But you've handled it with the same grace you bring to everything else. Diana had spent those 3 days fielding calls from reporters, civil rights organizations, and government officials. The mayor had personally called to apologize and promise reforms. The police chief had announced that Harrison was suspended pending a full investigation, but Diana knew that individual consequences weren't enough. That morning, the investigation into Harrison's record had been completed. Internal Affairs discovered a pattern of complaints stretching back years. 7 formal complaints had been filed against him for excessive force and discriminatory behavior. All had been either dismissed or resulted in minor disciplinary actions. The system protected him for years, Diana said to her mother during their morning phone call. My incident was just the one that finally got recorded and went public. Ruth, Thompson listened carefully to her daughter's words. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to make sure this leads to real change, not just temporary outrage, Diana replied. At noon, Diana walked to the podium set up outside the base's main building. Dozens of reporters and camera crews were gathered, along with a crowd of supporters holding signs that read, "Thank you, Colonel Thompson," and "Justice for all." Diana looked out at the crowd and began her statement. 3 days ago, I was driving home from visiting my mother when I was pulled over by Officer Harrison of the Oakwood Police Department. What happened during that traffic stop was recorded and has now been seen by millions of people around the world. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I want to be clear about something. This incident was not just about me. It was about a pattern of behavior that affects countless people in our communities every day. The difference is that I had the privilege of rank, education, and community support that many others don't have. A reporter raised her hand. Colonel Thompson, how did it feel to be treated that way despite your years of service to our country? Diana considered the question carefully. It was humiliating and frustrating. But more than that, it was heartbreaking. I've served this country for over 25 years. I've been deployed to dangerous places and worked to keep Americans safe. To be treated as a criminal while visiting my elderly mother was deeply painful. Another reporter called out, "What do you want to see happen as a result of this incident?" I want to see systemic change, Diana replied firmly. Officer Harrison's suspension is just the beginning. We need comprehensive bias training for all police officers. We need accountability measures that prevent officers with patterns of complaints from continuing to harm communities. And we need community oversight that gives people a real voice in how they're policed. Behind the crowd, Harrison sat in his car watching the press conference on his phone. He had been suspended without pay and was facing termination. His union representative had told him the case was nearly impossible to defend given the clear video evidence. Harrison thought about his 12 years on the force. He had joined to serve his community, but somewhere along the way he had lost sight of that mission. The investigation into his record had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own behavior and attitudes. After the press conference, Diana met with representatives from the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, and several veterans organizations. Together, they developed a comprehensive plan for police reform that they would present to the city council. Your voice carries weight that others don't have, explained Janet Williams from the local NAACP chapter. When a decorated military officer speaks about injustice, people listen, Diana nodded. Then I have a responsibility to use that voice effectively. The following week, the city council held a special meeting to address the incident and discuss police reforms. The meeting was packed with community members, many of whom shared their own stories of negative encounters with police. Diana spoke at the meeting, presenting a detailed plan for reform that included mandatory bias training, community oversight boards, and regular review of officer complaint records. She also proposed a partnership between the police department and local schools to build positive relationships between officers and young people. Change doesn't happen overnight, Diana told the council, but it starts with honest acknowledgement of problems and a commitment to do better. The council voted unanimously to implement most of Diana's recommendations. The police chief announced, new policies for handling complaints, and promised regular community meetings to discuss policing concerns. Harrison's case went before a disciplinary board 2 weeks later. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was terminated from the police department. The board also recommended that he undergo counseling and bias training before being eligible for any future law enforcement position. In a surprising development, Harrison requested a meeting with Diana through their attorneys. Diana agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. They met in a conference room at the police station, with lawyers present for both parties. Harrison looked tired and defeated, a sharp contrast to the aggressive officer from that morning 3 weeks earlier. "Colonel Thompson, I want to apologize," Harrison began, his voice shaky. "I was wrong. Everything I did that day was wrong. I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment, and I treated you terribly." Diana listened carefully to his words. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Harrison, but I hope you understand that this wasn't just about me. How many other people have you treated this way over the years?" Harrison's eyes filled with tears. "Too many. I've had time to think about my actions, and I'm ashamed of the officer I became. I lost sight of why I joined the force in the first place." "What are you going to do now?" Diana asked. "I'm going to get help," Harrison replied. "I'm starting counseling next week, and I want to find a way to make amends for the harm I've caused." 6 months later, Diana was invited to speak at the police academy's graduation ceremony for new recruits. She looked out at the young faces and saw hope for the future of policing. "You have chosen a difficult but important profession," she told the graduates. "You will have the power to protect or to harm, to build trust or to destroy it. I challenge you to see every person you encounter as someone's child, someone's parent, someone worthy of dignity and respect." The changes in Oakwood were gradual but real. Community policing programs were established, complaint procedures were streamlined, and officers received regular training on bias and de-escalation. Diana continued her military service but also became an advocate for police reform and community relations. Harrison completed his counseling program and eventually found work as a counselor for at-risk youth, using his experience to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. He never returned to law enforcement, but he found a way to serve his community in a different capacity. The incident that began as a routine traffic stop had grown into something much larger, a catalyst for meaningful change that would benefit the entire community. Diana's courage to speak out and demand justice had turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for progress. As Diana often told audiences when she spoke about the experience, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and say, "This is not acceptable." Change begins with one voice willing to speak the truth.